Hello, this is Edward Lambert, Effective Demand Research, and I thought I would do a quick video on how the Fed can raise the Fed rate without actually lowering the reserves. So this is the basic model where you have the Fed rate on the y-axis, and on the x-axis you have bank reserves. And so the target of the Fed rate, you can see that right here, the target of the Fed rate is usually set by the supply of reserves, this orange line right there, where meeting and crossing the demand for reserves. So where the demand for reserves and the supply of reserves cross, you'll get your Fed rate, your target. And then you have a ceiling for the Fed rate. That's the discount rate up here. So the Fed rate won't want to go higher than the discount rate. And you also have a floor, which is the interest on reserves. So if the interest on reserves is low, the Fed rate will be between the interest on reserves and the discount rate. And then the Fed will just change the supply of reserves to change the Fed rate. That's in normal times. Okay, now I'm going to switch to another graph. Okay, in this graph, what I've done is simply increase the supply of reserves. Move the orange line way out to here. So now the orange line is crossing the demand for reserves way out here. And that's where the Fed rate is going to be set. You come back here and you see now that's where the target is, the interest on reserves. So what happened was that the supply of reserves went out so much, QE and the policy there is that the supply of reserves went out so much that it went out onto this horizontal part of the demand curve, and the Fed rate dropped to its floor, the interest on reserves. Now here, if the Fed wanted to raise the Fed rate, they would have to undo all of these excess bank reserves, which are close to 4 trillion right now. All these excess bank reserves, they'd have to bring the supply of these excess reserves all the way back down until they start rising up the demand curve. So the Fed is a long ways away from being able to raise the Fed rate. But what they can do is raise the interest on reserves. And now we're going to go to the next graph to see what that looks like. Okay, in this graph, you can see that the interest on reserves has been increased. And that actually increased the target too. But the supply of reserves has not changed. So the interest, you raise the floor of the Fed rate, which is the interest on reserves, and that actually effectively raises the Fed rate. You still have the ceiling up here on the discount rate, but by increasing interest on reserves, you have actually increased the Fed rate without doing anything with the supply of bank reserves. Now we're going to go to the last graph and wrap this up. So on this graph, once the interest on reserves has been raised, as we can see right here, the Fed rate has been raised. The Fed can then decrease reserves while controlling the Fed rate with interest on reserves. So then the Fed can simply unwind all those excess bank reserves coming down here, maintaining the Fed rate. Now, the Fed is not sure that this is going to work, but this is the plan, is that they can raise the Fed rate as they need to simply by raising the interest on reserves.